Hey, hello everyone, how are you doing? Welcome back to the day 12 of 40 days of JavaScript. Today we are going to talk about object and object manipulation. If you're following the 40 days of JavaScript progress tracker, you might see a small change over there. Earlier, I was supposed to start with the this keyword after closure, but now I'm bumping up the object and the object manipulation on top of it because to understand the this like never before, you have to understand objects a bit. So we'll be understanding objects, not only a bit, a lot about object manipulation and a lot of other things around that. So the focus of today's session will be on introduction to objects, then the object properties. We'll learn about nested objects. We'll also learn about object creational patterns, then the object references and what you need to keep in mind because object is non-primitive data type, and then we'll talk about various static methods of object. Those are very handy for you to use in your real world programming. Then object destructuring that you must know to write less code, and I'll be talking about 6 to 7 use cases that you have to keep it in mind around object destructuring to code cleanly. Lastly, we'll be talking about optional chaining. What we won't be mentioning or what we won't be talking about deep in this video is prototypes and object oriented programming. No, we are not skipping them. The reason being, once you are in the journey to learn JavaScript, you have to follow certain mental model. You cannot jump your gun just from one to another for the sake of finishing it. You have to make them connected, your learning, so that at the end of it, you feel like whatever you have learned, you can hold in your memory for a longer time. That's the reason prototype and object oriented programming is placed in module 5, and you can see that on day 29 and 30th we are going to cover object oriented programming in JavaScript, type, prototype, chain, everything in details. But for that you need to build certain groundwork with object manipulations and many other things that will be covering by then. So I hope you stay tight to it. You show a lot of curiosity in learning JavaScript with me, and let's get started with today's lesson about object manipulation and everything around it. Your application needs data. So far whatever we have learned, that data was managed using simple variables. The simple variables was of type primitives, for example, number, boolean, string, etc. Now, there will be a situation in your programming where you have to handle the complex data structure or the complex data. For example, user data, for example, a company data, for example, an employee data. And that is when you need to know something beyond just the primitive types like number, boolean, etc. You need something more structured where you can store your data and then you can retrieve the data wherever required in the application. One such data structure used in JavaScript in a heavy way is called objects. Objects are nothing but the key value pair. This is a keyed collection. We also call it as a keyed collection, means it can be identified using its unique keys, and for each of the key you can store the value so that later point in time you can retrieve those value whenever you need in your application. Object can be created in multiple ways. The most straightforward way of creating an object is using something called object literal syntax. How do we do that? It's just using this pair of curly braces. So if I give a pair of curly braces, this itself is an object. But inside this pair of curly braces, as we are not given any information, we will call this as an empty object. And this empty object can be a value, just like we have given a value like number 10, or let's say tapaScript, a string, boolean true or false. So as it is a value, we will be able to assign this value to any of the variables. So I can create a variable called let user equals to this empty string. It's pretty much possible. Now this user holding a value whose type is an object. This is how you should be thinking. Now let us put some information to this object because right now this object is very much empty. So for this user, I want to store this user's name and age, for example. So I can create the properties. Properties means the each of the information that you want to store in an object. So name and age will be two properties that we want to store inside this object. So how do we declare the properties? We declare the properties using key value pair, and the key and the value should be separated using a colon character. So for example, I can tell it like name colon and then the value of the name, say tapas, and then we can do age colon the value, let's say 40. So here we have created an user object with two properties, name and age, Each of the properties having a key value pair. The first property key is name, value is tapas. Second property key is age, value is 40. You have to remember that. So once you have created this object, you will be using this information elsewhere in your program, isn't it? Now, to use this information elsewhere in your program, you have to retrieve the value of each of these properties from this object. For example, you want to print this particular user name along with user's age. So you will be doing like console.log. You want to do user's name. So you will do user dot name. So dot is the operator using which you can query a keys value from an object. So when you do user dot name, name is the key of this particular property. So once you do user dot name, you get back the value of this property, which is tapas in this case. Similarly, when you do console.log of user.age, you get back the number 40 here. Now the question comes, once this particular object has been created, can we add more properties to this? Yes, we can definitely add more properties to this object. So for example, if I have to add one more property to this object, let's say user dot is senior citizen, I can say false because the age is 40. So the user is not a senior citizen. Now I have added one property called is senior citizen to this particular object. If I do console.log of user now, I should be able to see this user is having three properties. The first two properties are name and age, and then we have added one more property called is senior citizen. We see it over here. The user object is having age, is senior citizen, and name. You can see that. Now there are a few more things that you need to keep in mind in terms of the key for an object. Here the key name doesn't have any quotes. You see that the name age doesn't have any quotes. You don't have to give the quotation explicitly while defining the keys. For example, I have not done this way, or I have not put a quote this way. It is because if you do not have a special character in your keys, it will be automatically be treated or coerced to string by JavaScript. So if you don't give this quote and just keep it like this will still be treated this name and age as string internally. But there are occasions where you have to make sure that you have to give the quotation around the key name. What are those? If you have some special character, for example, if I have say is admin colon true, I cannot create it like this. Why? Because now I have a special character called space in my key. So in that case, you have to explicitly give this double quote around your key. So this is something that you need to keep in mind. At the same time, when you have this special character over here and you try to retrieve it, right? So if I do user dot is admin, I cannot really do this. This is going to produce a syntax error. What you can see over here, unexpected identifier admin. You are seeing this. Why it is giving a syntax error? Because JavaScript is understanding now that user has a property called is, and if there is a space, it is not considering the rest of the part of the key. Now if you are in a situation like this, you cannot use this dot notation. Okay, in that case you have to use this subscript notation, and inside the subscript you have to again give a double quote around your key. Now JavaScript is going to retrieve the value of is admin and going to print it properly without any error. You are seeing here true at the line number 16, which is this one. So please keep this thing in mind, that whenever you want to have a special character in your key, you have to mandatorily put it inside the double quote, and to retrieve the value of such keys you have to use this subscript sign. You cannot do it using the dot. So for example, again, if you want to add such things later point in time, after the object creation, like how we have done for is senior citizen, you want to do something like user, and then you want to add an attribute, say movie lover, whether this particular user is a movie lover or not, and the movie and lover having a space in between, a special character. Again you cannot add it using the dot operator, how we have done for this is senior citizen, because is senior citizen didn't have any special character. In this case also, to add it, you have to use the subscript called movie lover, and then you can say true. This is allowed. Now this user object will have this movie lover property also in it. We can see it over here. The movie lover property is added. As we know about adding the properties, how about modifying and deleting properties from an object? That's pretty easy actually. For example, if this object got created with user's age is 40, I can always modify the user's age saying that user dot age equals to say 34. Now if I do console.log of user, I'm going to get this revised value from here to here. Here it will be 40, now it will be 34. You can see the user's age is 40 and here the user's age is 34. So it's revised because I have edited the property. Similarly, if you have to edit the value of any of the keys for some of the special character keys, you will be using the same method. For example, user movie lover, if I have to turn it to false, I'll be just doing this false. That's it, right? So it's pretty simple. Then how about deleting? For example, I was a movie lover, but now I am no more a movie lover. So I want to delete this particular property all at once. For that, you will be using a keyword called delete. This is from JavaScript. And then you will be just calling out the property that you want to delete from the object. For example, if I am interested in deleting movie lover, I'll be just giving this quote over here and then type the name movie lover. Now, this particular movie lover property will be deleted from the user object. If I go to the console, I can see that movie lover was here, but now the movie lover has gone. Movie lover is no more over here, right? You can see that. Similarly, if you want to delete another properties which doesn't have any special character, you can also do that. Delete user.age, for example. Now the age property also will be deleted. So far in this user object, everything that we have accessed, all the properties is almost hard coded, right? We knew like the name of this particular properties key is name of this properties key is age, like that. And using that, we have queried the object to get the value, or we have deleted. Using all these things is like very much hard coded. But in real world programming, what will happen that some of these inputs like this age or the name might come dynamically. It might be user input from where you can collect that what particular thing you want to access from that object, or it could be dynamically created in your program. There are varieties of ways that these keys can come to your program and then you want to access. So if we want to do things dynamically, how we'll be doing it? Again, very easy thing. So let's take up the user object again and let us not delete this age and movie lover for now because we are going to work with those properties. Now let me define something called const sum key equals to age. Okay. Now the sum key is a variable whose value is age. Let's assume the sum key's value will be populated dynamically. And in this case, the dynamically populated value is age. Now with this particular dynamic variable, I am going to access the value from this user object. So if previously I was doing user dot age and I was getting the value will be 34 over here because initially it was assigned 40 and then I had updated it to 34, so value will be 34 over here. Now let's say this age is not known to me and it is coming dynamically from this particular variable. Now if you have to access it in that way, what you have to do, you cannot again use the dot operator. You cannot write some key like this. Then what JavaScript will assume that user object has a property whose key is some key, because that's how we have been accessing things. But that's not the case. Some key is just a variable whose value is the age. So if you have to access age property using this dynamic way, then you cannot use this dot, rather you have to use this subscript again. Now in this case, this sum key will be replaced with this age in the runtime. So it will be like user subscript age. This pattern we have already seen over here. So irrespective you have a special character or not, if you give your key name within the quotation and the subscript, you can retrieve the value of it. So right now in the runtime, the sum keys value will be replaced with age. So it will look like user, then bracket, and then age. That is going to retrieve you the value 34 because user's age is 34 over here. Okay, so this is dynamically if you get the key and then you should be able to retrieve the value of it. I hope you understood that. This is about retrieving. Now, what if I have to construct an object whose key should be dynamically computed? In this case, we have retrieved the value from the dynamically computed key name. But now I want to do the reverse. I don't want to access it. I want to create an object. but whose key I won't be hard coding like this name, age, is admin. Rather, this name, age, all these things might come from the user input itself. How are you going to do that? Let's do that. Let's create a variable called car. And we have learned about the prompt, right? From window object. We have done the module 1 project where we have used it. I'll ask, which is your favorite car? Now, whatever the value that user will enter in the prompt, that value will be assigned into this car variable. We know that. Now let's create favorite cars, an object. And in this object, I need to have a property whose key should be the value that I'll be accepting from the user. How am I going to do that? For that purpose, you have to use this subscript again. And here you have to input this particular variable name. And then you can give any value to it. Okay. So what I'm trying to create over here, how many of these favorite cars I have. So for example, in the prompt, if I give BMW, I want to create an object favorite cars which says BMW colon 5. That means I have 5 BMWs. I hope someday I have it. Now, after this, what I'm going to do, I'm going to do console.log of fav cars just to make sure that it prints whatever I'm expecting. It is asking which is your favorite car, right? So I'll give BMW and say, okay, you see over here, it has BMW colon 5. So that means that BMW I have accepted randomly. If I say Audi now, another one, it will say Audi colon 5. So you understood, if I have to create an object with a key which is not hard coded but dynamically taken from somewhere, whether user input or from a variable dynamically computed, this is the way that you will be doing. You will put that variable where the value is assigned inside this subscript, or this third bracket is what we call, and then the value of it that you want to give. So far you have seen that we have created object using the object literals, which is the most common use, I would say. These are object literals, but there are variety of other ways that you can create object, and those different ways are going to influence how you will be reusing one object from another object using something very special in JavaScript, and the object oriented programming is called prototype. In the beginning of this video, we mentioned like how we will be handling prototype in the future sessions. We won't be getting inside prototype in this video, but I want to teach you in this video what are the different other ways that you can create objects so that you can keep in mind and practice. When we're getting into object oriented programming module, we are going to use them very heavily so that you have already understood what they are and what is their syntax. Now please understand this constructor function, understand this object literals and other methods, because when in the next session you're going to talk about this keyword, all these things are going to come back to you again. Okay. So what is constructor function? You know about function, isn't it? You know how we create function. We create function like function, let's say car, and then this car can take parameters called name, and it can take something called model. For example, this is your function, very regular function. Now taking this name and model, you can do anything inside the function. Constructor function is almost the similar thing. The syntax is almost similar, but by convention, the name of the constructor function must start with a capital letter. This is by convention, okay? Because the function, regular function name can start with the smaller letter, so that we don't confuse a regular function with a constructor function. The constructor function's first letter should be capital. So if I have to create a constructor function, I'll be creating it using a capital letter like car. Now this car is having something called a name, and then it's having something called a model. Now I have to create two properties inside the car. One is called name, one is called model. Then you will ask, what is this name and what is this model then? In function, we have learned something called parameter and arguments. That's how things are pretty related, right? One is parameter and another is argument. Parameters are the placeholder that you use while defining the function. Arguments are the actual value that replace the parameters when you call the function or invoke the function. Here also the same thing. As we want the car names and the car model to be supplied from outside whenever I am creating an object car. So why we have kept this placeholder name and model over here. Now this name and model will ultimately have the values of a particular car's brand name and car's model. If we have to create two properties for the name and model over here, I have to use the special keyword called this. This is what we are going to get deeper in the future video. But let's understand that we have to use something called this, then dot, and then you have to create the property that you want for the car object to have. The property, I can give the same name as name or your choice, anything. And then I'll be assigning the value of what user will pass to create this object. So this dot name equals to name, and then semicolon, this dot model equals to say model. Okay. Now the car is a constructor function. It has two properties. One is called name and model. The value of name and model can be supplied using these parameters. This is how you should be thinking. Okay, great. Now this is a constructor function, but this is nowhere look like this particular object. If you want to create an object from this, from the constructor function, you have to use a special keyword called new. So you will be using new followed by the constructor function's name, which is car in this case. And now over here, you can pass those value. I'll say BMW is the car name, and then I can say X1 is the model. So now if this return, I can take this inside a variable called BMW car equals to new car BMW X1. Now this is going to give me an object. If I do console.log of BMW car and then go to my console, I can see this car name is BMW, model is X1. You can see this is an object that's got created. But just closely look into these things. Previously, whatever the object we had created, it didn't have any notation of what kind of object it was. We had created an object with the object literal called tapas, its age and everything. It didn't have what kind of object it is. It never says it's an user type object. Okay, looking into this particular name, age, we may guess it's an user type, we may guess it's a profile, we may guess it's an employee, but we don't know. Certainly, we cannot tell what is the type of it. But here, the biggest thing is we can say this particular object is of type car. Do you see this? This is where the constructor function helps out to create different instances from a blueprint that you use to create different instances. For example, I have created a BMW car X1. Now, if I want an Audi car and say new car Audi, I can say A8. So now what I'll be having, I'll be having a BMW car and also I'll be having an Audi car. I have two cars. One is BMW car, another is Audi car, and both the car instances are created from this constructor function. So this is the usefulness of a constructor function. If I want to check if BMW car is instance of, if you remember in the operator, we have learned this instance of car, what are you going to get if I'm going to put this inside console.log? I'm going to get true because yes, BMW car is an instance of the car constructor function we have created from. So this is an advantage that in a programming, once you have the object, you can check this object is actually created from what blueprint, what constructor function, and then you can take the call on it. You can put more logic about it, right? So this is another way, a constructor function way that you can create. There is one more way that you can create almost similar to constructor function is JavaScript also provide you something called an object, which is like object object. If you want, you can create an object instance directly from this object. For example, you can do const person equals to again new object. Almost look like your constructor function, but instead of defining or instead of creating your own type, here you are using JavaScript's object type and then you are creating an object. And then you can do like person dot name equals to alpha, person dot age equals to 76, and do console dot log of person is of course going to give you an object. You can see over here is of course going to give you an object, but again what you're losing out over here, you cannot tell what is the type of it. You don't have a custom type. It is of course a type of object, but like before, BMW was a car, Audi was a car, you cannot define a custom type which you may want in your programming seriously because you want to manage your object in that particular fashion. So this is how it is. And then another way that I want to teach you creating object is using something called a factory function. Okay, what is a factory function? I think we have learned about this in the closer section already. What is factory function? That can produce different kind of functionality based on the user input or the user ask. Similarly, I can create a function that can produce different kind of object giving back to you, right? How do you do it? I can create something called function create user, this is factory, and it takes again name and age. Now what this guy can do, this guy can return you an object. Object is again the curly braces, and it can do name, it can do comma, age. Now beauty of it, whenever I call this particular function create user with a name and age, every time I do that, I will get back a new object which is having that particular name and age. And in this case, please remember that I don't have to use any new keyword. This is the difference. Here it is a simple JavaScript plain old function. I am just invoking the function create user over here, saying that tapas, 39, user to bob, 32. You see, there is no new keyword. But if you're using the constructor function where the function name starting with a capital letter and you use this keyword to create the properties, in that case you must use the new keyword. Please keep this difference in your mind. A regular function and calling the function versus creating a factory function versus creating a constructor function and then using the new keyword creating the object are two different things. So please remember these two things. Now I have user 1, user 2. If I do a console.log of user 1 and again console.log of user 2, what it is going to do, for user 1 this name will be tapas, age will be 39. So I'll be getting a object saying that name and age is tapas and 39. In this case bob and 32, I'll be getting bob and 32. First let us see both the output. Yes, of course, tapas 39, bob 32. Again, I don't know which type of object it is because this is not created from the constructor. This is created from the simple function in a literal type way. But here one question you might get, I haven't used any colon. I haven't used any colon over here. Then how it is giving me the object? It is because I am using something called a shorthand. You could have very well done something like name colon name and age colon age. Now it looks like an object, isn't it? There is a curly braces, there is a key value pair, and there are properties separated by comma. It's looking just like an object, and if you go to the output, it also giving the same output like before. But you remember one thing, that whenever the parameter and the key name are same, you don't have to expand it using this colon. You can use something called a shorthand where you can just give name colon age. It will expand internally with name colon name, age colon age. Do this only when your key name and the parameter through which you are passing the value is exactly same. In this case, my key name is name and the parameter through which I am passing the value is also name. So I can use it like this name directly. I don't have to do name colon name or age colon age. I hope you are clear with this. Now we did all this thing. We have learned a lot about object till now, but everywhere what we have done is like we have only created the keys whose value is like a number, string, boolean, and all these things. The value, those are all primitive values, isn't it? Now, along with the primitive values, the value can be a non-primitive value also. What are the non-primitive values in JavaScript? We have learned those are object, array, and function. So it means I can create an object whose value can be one function, whose value can be another object, whose value can be an array, isn't it? Let's see one variety of it. For example, I want to create this particular object. Apart from having name and age, I want to have one more function also with it. So I can say a function called greet, and here I'll do console.log. I want to print this particular name, that whatever you are passing. Okay, so here you have to access it inside the object. If you want to access any properties, you have to give this keyword. We'll get into it in much more details in the next session, but for now just remember we have to use this keyword and we'll do this dot name. As I have the user one object, and if I have to access name, what I'll be doing name. Correct now? If I have to access age, I'll be doing user one dot age. Correct now? Now if I have to access this greet, this particular function, I'll be doing user one dot greet. But it is a function. To execute that, you need the parenthesis. Now this user one dot greet, what is going to do is going to invoke this particular function. This is a function and is going to print this console.log, which is going to print this particular name, and this name will be the name that you passed while creating this particular object. I had passed tapas, so it will just print this particular name tapas. We can see at the line number 63, we have this particular name defined. Now, one terminology that I want to clarify over here. Whenever you have a function inside an object, you will call that function as method. Okay. Let us create one more very simple object in the literal way. So for example, I can say let profile equals to name colon tapas company colon say creavis message colon. Now the value can be another function, isn't it? Function, and here it can say console.log works at this dot company. I have used strings template literal here. We have not learned it yet, but whenever you want to create an expression using the string and the dynamic value, you pass the dynamic value using this dollar and this curly braces. So in the runtime, what will happen? JavaScript will take the value of it and replace it. So in this case, this dot name will refer to tapas and this dot company will refer to creavis. So we'll say tapas works at creavis if I am accessing this particular message. Now I have this profile object, so I can definitely do console.log profile.name company. This is going to give me the company name, say Creovis. Now if I invoke profile.message, what it is going to do, simple, is going to invoke this particular function which will print this console.log, and this dot name will be with the name that I have instantiated this particular object, which is tapas works at this dot company will be Creovis. So let's see 85, 86 and 88, which will be eventually this line number 79. So I have tapas Creovis and then tapas works at Creovis. That is from this line number 80 because this is where the console.log exists. You got the point? So I can create an object which can have a property whose value can be a function. This is very clear. Now let's learn something called a nested object. That means an object can have a property whose value can be another object. Let's take this profile object itself and let's add one more property to it called address. Now address can have multiple things right in it. It can have a city, it can have a state, it can have a zip or pin code, many things. So it means that this qualifies to have multiple attributes in itself. It means that this can be another object, and inside that I can have multiple properties. So for example, I can have something called city and I can write that my city is Bangalore. I can have a zip or pin code. I can say my pin code is 56032. I can have something called a state. Bangalore is in Karnataka state. And then finally, I can have something called a country. Bangalore is in India. So it means that I have now an address which is again having multiple key value pair. So I have an object address inside another object profile. So this particular object which is inside another object is called nested object. How will I access the country, the value of country? Pretty simple. What I have to do, I have to do console.log of profile object, which is the outer object, dot the key of the inner object, which is address in this case, dot country is something that I am interested in accessing, and this is going to give me India. I can see it's getting printed over here, right? Even inside this particular nested object also you can have another property, say greeting. It can have another function, and the function might be saying console.log welcome to India. Now if you are doing profile dot address dot greeting, you will get this message, welcome to India. You got it over here? So this is how we can really store complex data or complex data structure in an object. It can go to any depth, it can go to anywhere nested that you would like to, but the fact is you can create things like this. All right, this is great that we are now able to create object in multiple ways. We are able to handle its properties. We are able to create nested objects and all these things. But some point of time, you have to programmatically know, like if a particular property exists in an object, you will know if a property exists in an object using something called key. Okay. So I have this particular profile as an object. If I want to know whether the profile is having a particular property called salary or not, how am I going to test that out? I can test that out simply this way. Console.log profile.salary. Now, if this guy is giving me any value other than undefined, I would say that salary exists in profile. If it gives me an undefined, then I will say salary doesn't exist. So I can write something like if profile dot salary, if it doesn't exist, if it is returning undefined, means it's a negative value, I can put a not in front of it to make this particular condition pass to positive. Then it will go inside this if. I'll say console dot log the salary property doesn't exist. Simple, isn't it? Now if I go to my console, I will see the salary property doesn't exist. Why? Because I have not added something called salary over here. Now, if I want to add a salary, let's say add a salary of 100 rupees. Now, if I go to my console, I won't see this message because it's not going inside that if at all over here. Okay. Now, this works. This particular check works, but it fails in one way. So, what if instead of the value, I give it undefined? Now, profile.salary will be undefined, correct? Now, if this check comes, it will say profile.salary is undefined, negative value, not means true the value. So it will go inside this if, and if it is going to say the salary property doesn't exist, which is not true. Salary property exists, but just that is value is undefined. That means this way of checking things is breaking here, right? If you have this condition in your program logic, the logic is proven wrong because salary property exists, but you're forcefully saying that it doesn't exist because its value is undefined. You want to see that again, it is back. The salary property doesn't exist, which is not true. Now, for that reason, instead of checking it in this way, you can check it using something called the in operator. In this case, the in operator will work properly. So I can do like console.log of, first you have to take that particular property name salary. Okay. And you are checking whether salary in the particular object is called profile. What it is going to give me now? It is going to give me true because salary exists over here. Though this is failed, but this is going to give me true because salary exists. You see over here at the line number 96, it is giving me true. This is over here. Now, if I remove salary from here, this is going to give me false because now salary doesn't exist. Is giving me false because salary doesn't exist. So this is the right way of using it, using the in operator to check a particular property really exists in an object or not. You can use the dot one, the previous way of doing that, but it has that small flaw that you have to keep in mind. One more special case. If we want to walk through all the properties of an object in a loop, then we can use something called a for in loop. Okay, how that will be? It's a for in loop. The syntax is for a particular key in object, we can do something. So if I have to run the same thing on this profile object, what will happen? I'll just replace this object with profile. So that means for each of the key in the profile object, it is going to do something. Now we have seen in the scope session that you should be using at least some specifier and of course let. Why let? We have explained that. So I have defined let key in profile. If that is happening, then first let us do console.log of key. What it is going to do, it is going to iterate and from the profile object going to get me all the key like name, company, message, address. Correct? So I'm expecting name, company, message, address. All four I got. Now as I have got the key, it is very easy for me to get the value also, isn't it? Console.log, I know how to access the value. I have the object name which is like profile, and then in the subscript I can just pass the key, which you know before that if you want to dynamically pass the key value, you will be using subscript dot won't work there, and you pass the key over here. Now I am printing the key and the value line one after another. So I should be able to see them. Name, tapas, company, creovis. Message was a function, so printed the entire function. Address was another nested object, so it's printed the object completely. So I have seen everything, all the values using the for in loop in the console. So please use for in loop whenever you want to get all the keys and the values in an iterative fashion. That's when the for in will come into picture. There is one more method called Object.keys. You have to remember this. So if I do console.log of Object.keys, and here if I pass my object name, I will be getting all the keys in that object, and all those keys I'll be getting inside an array. So for example, the profile object has name, company, message, address, these four property, and these are the keys for each of the property. I'll get all these keys in an array. So if I see the output of this at the line number 99, you see this array over here, name, company, message, address. I have got it in an array, all the keys together in an array. So these are some of the methods and the loops and the ways so that you can identify what are the keys and values of an object and dynamically can play around with it. Right? This is how you will be using things in the real world project as well, and you will find things in your task of today's session as well. So do you remember this diagram? Yes, you will remember if you're coming from the execution context session, right? I told you in the beginning that in JavaScript, things are very related. That's how you have to create the mental map while learning JavaScript. You remember that there was an object called user, and this user object in the execution context was stored in a location of the memory, and that particular memory location had a unique address. That's how the non-primitive types in JavaScript will be stored in the discrete memory and heap, right? Object is one of them. Object is always stored and passed by reference instead of value, that we have learned already. With the same thing, we want to extend that particular knowledge a bit while dealing with object and while comparing multiple objects from one to another. You have to know this particular reference of object while even you are comparing. Let's do that. Let's create a variable called fruit, and the value of it an object with a property, and my favorite one is of course mango. I love mangoes. Now create one more variable, one more fruit, and let's take the same value. I will in fact copy it from the top one. Now the question is, are these two objects same or different? So in JavaScript, objects are a reference type. These two are two distinct objects. Even then their value look like same. It is because when I have created const fruit equals to name mango, in memory there is a location where this particular object was stored, and there was a memory address for this, let's say xa01. When I create another variable and assign an object, it will do the same. It will create another memory location, and where it will store this object, let's say it is yb02. These two memory location in the memory are entirely different. They are very distinct, even though the value that they are storing in that memory location is exactly same. So just seeing the value, don't really compare and say that these two object instances or these two objects are same. If I do console.log of fruit triple equals, we know strict equality operator, one more fruit, this is going to give me definitely false. Even if you do the same thing with the loose equality operator, which is double equals, you are still going to get the false. You see this line number 121, 122 are giving me false, false, because of this particular comparison. So you have to remember, when you're comparing two objects, they're always compared by their references. They are not compared by the values, actual values assigned to them. Okay, now one more twist to it. What if we do fruit equals to one more fruit? What is equal sign here? Is an assignment operator. That means right side value get assigned to the left side value. What does it mean? It means that here fruit and one more fruit now pointing to the same location in the memory. That means they are pointing to the same object. So now if I do this comparison, over here is going to be true, this is going to be true. But before you do that, the fruit cannot be declared with const, right? Because once you declare a variable with const, you cannot reassign another value. So I have to make it definitely late so that I can do the reassignment. So as I made it late, let's see these two things. Awesome. Now as you're seeing, the results are true because now fruit and one more fruit are pointing to the same reference, same object. So this is how the object references, object comparison matters. Whenever you're comparing two objects, don't look at their values, look at how they have assigned with each other, and based on that the outcome will be whether those two references are pointing to the same object. If yes, then the equality operator is going to give you true, otherwise false, not just by looking into the value you're assigning to them. I hope this is clear. So if you have reached this far, I would say great job. I know this video is longer, it's way longer than all other videos that we have given so far, but it's worth because we are learning a lot of stuff about object that's going to be very useful to you. So don't get demotivated saying that's a longer session. Take break, come back to the later half in the later point in time, but make sure that you complete the entire session, you take the task, you submit the task, so that your entire time that you are investing on this is fulfilled. Okay, so let's get started with the second half of it, where we are going to cover about the static methods, some of the key static methods that you will be hitting again and again in your programming in JavaScript. And then we'll be talking about object destructuring, which in itself is something that you must learn. Let's get started with static methods. So the first static method we're going to talk about is called assign. There are a few static methods we have already spoke, like create, keys, right? Those are also object.create, object.keys are the static methods. Now we'll be learning a few more. So the assign, object.assign is a static method that copies all of the object's own properties from a source object to a target object. Okay, so let's keep it simple. Let's create const a target object and let's give some properties to it. For example, p colon 1 comma q colon 2, and then let's have one more object called source. Over here let's have a colon 3 comma b colon 5. Now if we do const returned obj equals to object.assign and then pass the target comma source. Let's see what will be the output of return object. So the return object is p, q, a, b, all of them together, right? Target already had p and q, source had a and b. Then now when you're passing target and source both in the object.assign, we got the returned object which copied the source to the target. So it's copied the source to the target. Great. Now we'll do a small modification. For example, instead of p and q, let us have a over here. So if you see, the target is having p and a, source is also having a and b. So a is common over here. If this is the case, there will be an overriding happening. So now what will be the output? The target has P1, A2, source is A3, B5. Assign is going to copy from source to target. So it is definitely going to replace targets A colon 2 with source A colon 3 because those are with the same properties key. Now the final output will have P colon 1, A colon 3 and B colon 5. You can see P colon 1, A colon 3, B colon 5. So when there is a commonality between the keys between source and target, the target one will be replaced by the source one. That is the output that we have seen. Create one more object, obj2 equals to object.assign. First is always the target. So target is an empty object and the source is the obj. So it means the object.assign is going to copy the source to the target. Source is name colon tapaScript. The source will be now copied inside this particular new object and create an object2. So if I do console.log of object2, I'll be getting again name colon tapaScript. So I'm able to clone it. You see over here, I'm getting name colon tapaScript to the line number 141, which is this object2. But here also you have to keep in mind, now though object2 is a clone of object, they are having the same value, but they are not the same reference again, because this is just a copy. If you do console.log of obj triple equals obj2, this is definitely going to give you false. Yeah, as you see, because those are two different references. One thing remember, the cloning that happened over here is a shallow cloning. That means it is not going to clone the deeply nested object. For deep cloning, you need an alternative like structured clone method, which will do the cloning of the nested object. So let's see what exactly it is. So be careful while cloning an object that is having the nested object using object.assign. Let me explain that with an example. Let's create const obj3 a colon 1 and then let's create b colon whose value is another object c colon 2. This is how the nested object is, right? We understand that. Now great, object 3 we have created. Now create, let's say const obj4 equals to object.assign we will pass this empty object first, and then we'll be passing obj3. Now from obj3, we are trying to clone and create obj4. This is great. So obj3, if I do console.log, is going to give me a:1, b:, c:2. obj4 also, if I do console.log, is going to give me the same output, but object3 and object4 are two different references. Now what will happen if I do obj4 dot b dot c equals to 3? This is definitely going to give me this particular object, which is like a:1 and b's value is another object. Now what I am doing obj4 dot b, that means this obj4 dot b dot c is value from 2 to 3. I am going to change. Okay, great, I have changed. Now, if I do console.log of obj3.b.c and then console.log of obj4.b.c, what will be the value? obj4.b.c value I have changed to 3, so of course it will be 3. obj3's value I have never changed. obj3's value was this only. So its b value was c:2. So if I do obj3.b.c, it is supposed to give me 2, isn't it? So this line number 151 supposed to give me 3, line number 152 supposed to give me 2. That's my expectation. But I am getting 3 in both the places. Why so? That means when I am changing something for obj4, the thing for obj3 is also getting changed. This is something that you might find like a bug, but it is not a bug because this is how Object.assign works. Object.assign in JavaScript performs a shallow copy, meaning it copies the properties value from the source to target. We know that. But while dealing with a nested object like this, okay, Object.assign copies the references of those nested objects rather than creating a new copy. So for this one, it had created a new copy, but for this one, it had not created a new copy. It just copied the references. As it copied the references are same. So if you are changing this value, it is impacting both the cases. If you do a equals to 100, and then if you print here console.log of obj4's a, which you have just now changed, of course this will be 100, and obj3's a was 1. So what do you expect? You expect this to be 1, right? Because you have not changed this one. Now if you go to console, you see that value 101 is right, but it is not behaving the same way for the nested object, because if you are dealing with a non-nested object for assign, it will be creating a new reference always. So why? The new reference has got created for this guy. Inside that, a:1 for obj3 and a:1 for obj4 was entirely different because two new references. But if there is a nested object, for that nested object, there won't be any new references created. It will be just the same reference that will be copied from the source to target. That is the reason if we are changing one, it is changing the other one also. So this will be 3 over here, but for the other one, which is non-nested, the proper value will be there. In this kind of situation, please don't use Object.assign at all. For cloning it, for deep cloning, always use something called structured clone. That's a proper method to use for it. So the same thing if I use with structured clone. Okay, I have obj3. Okay, this one. Now I will do const obj5 equals to structured clone. This is the method that JavaScript gives you. Pass obj3 over here. And now if you do the same thing, I'll copy the same code over here. Here instead of obj4, I'll do obj5. Here obj4, I'll do obj5. And before that, I have just assigned these two. So for obj5 now is a cloned object. Okay. For this cloned object, a value I have changed to 300 and is b's. Inside b it has a c, that value I have changed to 30. So I'm expecting that for obj5.a the value will be 300. For obj3.a, whatever the value, that is the value that it will be, because that's not going to change, a:1. For obj5.b.c I have changed it to 30, and as it is a deep cloning, that means the references of the nested object won't be copied. In that case, the value of obj3 won't be changed. So obj3's value was 2 before, b.c value was 2, so it will be 2. So I'm expecting 300, 132. 300, 132. So in this case, it has done a deep cloning. Due to that, on the source one, there won't be any impact because the target one, including its nested objects, is a completely different separate references, even for the nested object. So if you change the nested object on the target one, there is no impact on the source one. But with shallow copy, the reference only was got copied to the target. So if you change the target, the source also will be changed. If you change the source, the target also will be changed. Okay, so this is how the object and the references work. Be very careful in terms of using the methods that you are using to copy, clone, and etc. So that's about object.assign. Let's move to the next method. The next method that we are going to learn is called entries, object.entries. What object.entries does is, like, if you have an object with these properties, from this object you can transfer or translate that object to an array. So for example, you can do something like const my array now equals to object dot entries, and you can pass the object that you want to translate to an array. Here now, if you do console.log of my array, you will find an array you see over here. So the first array is having two elements, which is like key and value. The second array is having again two elements, which is key and value. First element's key is a, value was tapas, key b, value was 32. So from this object, you now able to translate that into an array, because if you want to do any kind of operation on top of it, where this will be useful in many cases when you are dealing with the data in your application, your API might be giving an object like this, but your UI is built in such a way that you have to convert that to an array so that you can loop through it, and then you are able to get the data to populate in your UI. Many times it happens. On those cases, this object.entries will be very useful. There is an opposite method of that, which is called from entries. JavaScript has another data structure called map, right? We learn about the map set and all these things, where you can create a map like this. The map is an array. Inside that, you have another array with two elements like foo and bar, buzz and 42, like this. Now, if you want to convert this one to an object, so this is already an array like structure. You want to convert that to an object. In this case, an object was converted to an array. So you use something called entries. But from array, if you want to convert it to an object, you will be using something called from entries. So you'll be doing object dot from entries, and then you pass entries. This is going to return you an object, say obj entries. I'm giving a variable name. Now if I do a console.log of obj entries, what I'm going to see, I'm going to get an object with two properties. First property's key will be foo, value will be bar. Second property's key will be buzz, value will be 42. You got this one? Foo and buzz. Foo is having bar, buzz is having 42. Now one more method, and very important method, is called freeze. The freeze method gives us the immutability while handling object. What is immutability? Immutable means something that you cannot change. Mutable means something that you can change. Let's say you want to create an object which is like read only. As you have created the object, you don't want that particular object to be changed later point of time. So let's say const employee, and then there is something called salary. We'll give some salary to this. Now you don't want this employee salary to be changed. Okay, no new salary to be assigned to this particular employee. So what we can do object dot freeze, and then we can pass this object that we want to freeze. If we do that, this particular object is already frozen. Now if I try to do employee dot salary, going to increment his salary by 100 more rupees, I am just going to do console dot log of employee. What am I going to get? Am I going to get this employee with salary 100 or employee with new salary 200? I'm still seeing the employee salary is 100. It's not got changed to 200. It's only because I have frozen this particular object. Now there is one more method called object dot is frozen, and if you pass any object to it, it will return you a true or false to determine whether a particular object has been frozen or not. So in this case, if I just put it inside console.log, I'm expecting a true because just now I have frozen this object, right? So yes, it is a frozen object. So you understood how the frozen works. Now like frozen, there is one more method which is called Sil. Like the phrase object.sil is also helps us in terms of objects immutability. But there is a difference between freeze and seal. When we use object.freeze with the freeze method, we freeze the object in such a way that it is completely immutable. You cannot change the value that we have seen. You cannot add a new property to it. For example, if I am doing emp dot name equals to Alex, it's not possible. If I try to do delete of emp dot sal, that also not possible. None of these things are possible. Ultimately, when I'm doing console.log emp, you are going to see that it is having only one property, salary. None of these things are getting impacted. You see here, salary is still 100. But with object.sil, there is a difference. With the sil method, we still make the object immutable. We prevent any kind of new addition, new properties to object, or the removal of new properties. Those two are really prohibited, just like the freeze method, but you can modify existing properties value. This time we'll say const department and we'll say name colon say finance. Okay, with this I can do object.sil and I can pass the department object. Now department object is sil. As a department object is sealed, I cannot add and remove anything from here. So for example, if I do department dot address equals to Bangalore, and then I will be printing this console dot log of department, I will still see the department having only one attribute, that is name. This new attribute address will not get added. So I still see only name is there. There is nothing apart from name. Now let me try to delete name. For example, I'll do delete department dot name. Now, will it allow me to delete this? No, it is still having the name finance in the department. But if I try to do department.name, this is the existing property, I change from finance to HR. Now, if I see the output, I'm seeing the name has been changed to HR. So you saw the difference in terms of freeze. I was not even able to do this one. But in terms of seal, I am able to reassign a value, new value to this property, but cannot really add or delete an existing property. So that's the very basic difference between a freeze and a seal. But both kind of works in the immutability area of an object. There is one more very interesting method, static method is called hasOwn. hasOwn, why it is a static method? It returns true if any object has an property in it. Okay, so for example, if I can take this department itself, department has name, right? So I can do object dot has own this particular method and can pass department is the object, and we are trying to see if it has name, right? If I put this entire thing inside a console.log, this is going to give me true because department has a property called name. So I'm getting this true. Now instead of name, if I pass address, because address we could not add over here, so address is not added to department, I'm going to get a false. Yeah, it gives me false. There are still few more static methods of object that we are going to see when we learn about object oriented programming and prototypes. There are few more, especially with dealing with objects configuration. Those things just hold on for now. Don't have to really focus, but when you get into prototypes, we are going to get deeper into those. So these are the static methods that you should be practicing in your own way. Find some of them in the task as well, so that it makes things much better for you. Object destructuring, what does it mean? Destructure means what? It's kind of breaking and then taking the things apart. That's what it is. Now from object, what we can break and take the things apart? Of course, object has its properties, and from properties we can get the values. So definitely we can take out the value. We can destructure an object and take out the value, but we already know how to take out the value. Then what exactly destruction is going to help? Let's understand with some most practical use case, and I can guarantee that all of the use cases that I'm going to teach you now, you will be using somewhere in your programming life, and these are the use cases you have to master definitely. Let's take an object for us. This is the object. It's a student object, quite big. Let me give a walkthrough of it. It has a name property with a value, age, what is the standard that particular student is studying, what are the subjects that this student has taken, parents, father, mother, and the email, and the address, right? As you are seeing, it has primitive as a value, non-primitive also as a value. What are the non-primitives? You have array as a value. You have two such properties having nested object as a value. a little bit of complex data structure that we have taken for our example because we want to nail down the destructuring with all the use cases. So what is destructuring at a first shot? So we store data in objects to retrieve it based on the needs at a later point in time, right? For example, if we want to retrieve the name of the student, what we'll be doing? We'll be doing student.name. Very simple. If we want to do for the city, what we'll be doing? We'll be doing student.address.city, isn't it? And if I print name and city, then it is going to print me name and city. So dot notation definitely works really well for retrieving the object's value from its property. So if I write the same thing that just now I explained in code, it will be something like this, isn't it? Const name equals to student.name, const city equals to student.address.city. And if I do name and city, it is going to give me John Williamson and the city. John Williamson and John city. That's what is going to print. This is definitely works, but the problem is too much of code. Nobody wants to write too much code. Now, if you want to go with certain shortcut, that is where the destructuring helps you to achieve those shortcut. Now, the same thing, how am I going to do? The same thing, how am I going to achieve is like this. Const, instead of doing student.name, this you don't have to give completely omit. Student is having these properties, name, age, standard, etc. Now, whatever the properties that you want to retrieve from student, you can now give within this particular flower bracket. So what JavaScript is going to do, it's a destructuring, object destructuring syntax is going to take out this name from this particular object, create a variable called name with this particular name, and whatever the value of student.name John Williamson is going to assign to this name automatically. Now in this case also the name is going to print John Williamson. So for you to do like const name equals to student.name, writing that big, you can now using the destructuring, you can take out whatever the properties you need and their value you need from this object. Apart from name, if I need age, I can just do, now JavaScript is going to create two variables for me. One is name, one is age, and going to assign student.name's value John Williamson to the name, student.age value which is like 9 to this particular age variable. So I can use the name variable and age variable wherever I want. I'll get the value John Williamson and the age 9. So as you understood how destructuring works, let us now talk about a few more use cases of destructuring. The first use case is about adding a new variable with a default value while destructuring. From this line of code, we have now learned that with object destructuring, I can create two variable name and age with the value of student's name and student's age. Now let's say you have to create another variable and that particular variable's value doesn't exist inside the object at all, but you need it in your programming. For example, this student, they get meal and the meal is bread. Now the meal, that particular property is not available inside the student object at all. But the beautiful part about it is that in the single line of code, you can now also define something called meal, and then you can actually initialize with a default value. So now the meal will also have a default value called bread, and along with the student is also having name and age created. Let's forget city for now. Let's print name, age, and meal. So name will have student.name John Williamson, age will have 9, and the meal will have bread. We see John Williamson, 9, and bread. You saw how much simplified the code is over here. You have not really written a lot of code. But if you had to achieve the same thing over here without destructuring, how you would have done this? You would not have done in this way. What you have done it in a multiple line. You would have done something like let meal equals to student. Do you have something like student dot meal? If student dot meal is there, then okay, return student meal. Otherwise, you return bread. This is how you would have done it. Instead of writing this entire line, this will be student. Instead of writing this entire line, what we have done is we have saved ourselves to just this. This is where the destructuring is pretty helpful. So that's the first use case. Now second use case is new variable. Here we have added with a static value. Now can we add a new variable with a dynamic value? Yeah, that also possible. Now student is having something called subjects, right? And there are 3 subjects, correct? Now let's say I want something like const subjects, I want to destructure. So subjects, if I want to destructure equal to student, if I do, I will definitely get the subjects value, which is nothing but this particular array. Fair enough. Now, if I want another variable with it, with will hold the value of number of subjects. How I can do it? I can say number of subjects equals to, I already have a subjects. I can do a dot length, because on array, if I do dot length, it gives me how many elements are there in the array. Now, if I do console.log of number of subjects, is going to give me 3, right? So in this case, the value was hard coded value. In this case, I'm computing the value from another variable that I got through destructuring of this object. Isn't this awesome? This is going to give me 3. I got the output 3. Now the third use case. The third use case is about adding aliases. And when you work with React, Angular, and all these technologies, you will be dealing with data and you will be using these aliases a lot. Especially people use a lot of asynchronous call, and there are certain variables they want to use in a multiple times, like whether the data has been loaded, data has come, and the multiple variables you have to take from your response object from that API call. And then you want to create aliases. Okay, we can give an alias name to our destructured variables. That's what you need to understand. It is useful when there are chances of variable name conflict. From different sources, different APIs are giving you the similar kind of object responses into your one JavaScript file or the execution context. So you have loading a particular variable name from GraphQL, from REST, or from another webhook. Now you cannot use the loading variable name 3 times, right, into your file. It is going to give you error. So from GraphQL loading, you have to use something else. From REST loading, you have to use something else. From webhook loading, you have to use something else. That's where the alias will come for your rescue wherever you have the chances of your variable conflicts. Okay, now let's see how we can create aliases. We have something called std, right? But we don't want to call it, say, std. So we can do const std equals to student. So I'll get a variable called std with the value 3, because that is what it is. But I don't want to call it std. Instead of that, I want to call it as standard. This is where the standard is an alias. Now I can do console.log of standard. This is going to give me 3. Yeah, I got 3. But in this stage, if I use std, I cannot use that. I'm going to get an error, uncaught reference std, because the moment you are using alias, JavaScript is not going to create a variable with std. It is always going to create a variable using the alias name. Please remember that. So that is the third use case. Now let's go to another use case. This is where we'll be talking about nested object destructuring. One more level down. So far, all the destructuring happened from the top level, whether it is a name, age, standard, subjects, whatever it is. But we have 2 nested objects over here. One is called parents, another is called address. How about dealing with the value from there, right? Now, a nested object, we know, has one or more property values as another object. So here we have address and parents. Address and parents, these keys are at the top level, not at the nested level. But father, mother, email, street, city, country, zip, all in the nested level. So to take out address, simply what I can do, const address equals to student. I'll do console.log of address. I see this address. Okay. Now I want to pick up the value of zip. One way that I can definitely do is by doing address dot zip over here. Now this is going to give me the zip value, which is 5791. Great. But I want to use this zip value somewhere. So that means I'll be doing again const zip equals to address.zip, and then I'll be using zip over here. So multiple line of code that I'm writing. I can actually get rid of all these things using the destructuring syntax. How? Address is going to give me the nested object, which is from here to here. From here, if I want to pick up only zip value, I can just do address colon curly braces what I want to pick up from the nested object. Please remember, this is the syntax. Now I'll be getting the zip value, which is like 5791, just like before. 5791 output is exactly same, but I have saved so many lines of code writing. It's in a single line I could extract out the thing. So this is about destructuring the nested object. You can go to any level, just by following the same syntax: colon, curly braces, colon, curly braces, and you can actually go like that. Now let's take one more thing is called destructuring to the function parameters. Okay, we understood about destructuring. Great. Now let's say there is a method called send email, and this method, what it does, it sends an email and then it prints like I have sent this particular email to this particular student's email ID. That's what it says. And this particular student's email ID is which one? This parents is having one email ID. You see, inside student, there is something called parents, which is a nested object, is a value. Inside that, there is an email attribute, then there is a value of that. Now, one way of doing this will be, I can do something called function send email. And here I can take this student object and then I can say here console dot log of sent an email to, I can do student dot parents dot email, right? Student dot parents dot email. And then I can actually call this send email, passing the entire student object that I have created at the top. So I invoke this function. This entire student object has gone in. Entire student object has gone in. From there, it will query the student.parents.email and it will say send an email to this. Let's see the out. Send an email to john-parents@abcde.com. Perfect. Output is great. Email sent. There are few things. Unnecessarily, I have put the entire student object, which is not really required. Here I can use the destructuring. Instead of querying the value over here, I can pass the exact value that is required. Student object I'm anyway passing from here. So in the function parameter level itself, you can apply the destructuring and then can take out the value, exact value that you need in your functionality. I know how to destructure a nested property from an object. You have the top level, then the granular level, and then you take out. For example, in the student, I had address, I had zip. I had address, inside that I had zip. So I did address colon zip. Now, if I have to take out the email on the student, what I'll be doing? In student, I have parents, colon, then email, right? For the destructuring. So instead of writing the entire student object here, I can do now parents, I'm destructuring it, colon, email. So I will get the email value. Exactly the same syntax over here. I have taught you nested object destructuring, exactly same syntax over here, parents, and from there I'm destructuring email. Now you can use just this email. You don't have to do the query of it, student.parents.email. So think about, if this email has been used multiple places, you have to either create a variable inside this, say let email or const email equals to students.parents.email and use that else everywhere, or you have to do the student.parents.email everywhere that email is required. Instead of that, we are creating this variable here itself, email, which is having the value of this student's parents email and can use it across. It's going to give you the same output. Send an email to john-parentsabcd.com. Okay, now one more use case. Same way how you have passed a destructure value to a function parameter, similarly you can also destructure a function's return value. How? Let's take this up. Let's take a function called getStudent, which return an object. You see this? This is returning an object. No, this is a student object. A getStudent is a function, very simple arrow function. Now from here, for example, if you need the name and subject, so one way of doing that would be const another student equals to getStudent, and then const name equals to another student dot name, const subjects equals to another student dot subjects, and then you can do console dot log of name colon subjects. I have already declared name at the top as a variable somewhere. Yes, name is already been declared, so I cannot use the name here. I see, I'll call it as another name, and I'll be using another name over here instead. Similarly for subjects also, I'll say another subjects, and I'll be using this another subjects over here. Now if I see my output, I'm seeing John Williamson and the subject. Now the same thing, without creating, all these things, if I have to do with whatever we have learned so far, very easy. Instead of creating this one, I can now destructure them, this name and subjects, into two new variable. What way? I can do name colon another name, which is like alias, subjects colon another subs, which is the alias. Get rid of these two line completely. and that's it. I have another name and another subjects. Those two new variables having value John Williamson and the subjects. Isn't it awesome? So this is another use case where you can actually use object destructuring. Now the last use case that we are going to use is called destructuring within the loop. For that, let us take now an array, because we're talking about iteration. Instead of student, now I have an array of students, and the array is having multiple objects. We'll learn about array in the array master course, in future. But for now, you take it in this way, that array is a collection of element. The element can be a primitive and non-primitive. In this case, each of the elements are non-primitive, which is nothing but an object. And what is object, you already know. Now object destructuring comes in very handy if we need the object's key and value within the loop. We can using the destructuring using a new style of for loop called for off loop using a very simple syntax. So let's take this array of students, and to keep it simple, each of the student having only two attributes, which is name and grade. Now we want to use the for loop to iterate over the students array and retrieve the values of each of the student object. How am I going to do this? I'm going to write this for, and then why it is called off, because I'll be writing an off over here. The right side of the off will have the array. The left side of the off is where we can destructure this name and grade using let name comma grade. So simple syntax, and here I can write console.log name comma grade. Now it is going to iterate through the students arrays, not student, students, and is going to extract out this object in each iteration. From this object, it is going to destructure the name and grade, and is going to print that name and grade. Now if I see the output, I will have William A, Tom A plus Bob B, each of their details. William A, Tom A plus Bob B, each of the details. So that's kind of widely useful, the entire destructuring part of it. So I hope you like this as well. The last one is about the optional chaining. Let's learn about optional chaining because it's very handy. What is optional chaining? Now in JavaScript, we know like how to access the properties value from an object or the nested object. Now there is a new syntax that got introduced in ES 2020 that actually simplifies how you are accessing properties from a nested object, from an object within an object, especially if the nested object some properties value can result into a null or undefined. That time what happened is like the uh, application throws error, and you have to do lot of check to make sure that your application is not crashing, it is giving proper value, or you're handling things gracefully. Let's take an example. I have employee and salary. Now let's see console.log. If I do employee dot salary, what will happen? It's going to give me this particular employee dot salary is going to give me this particular object. Correct now? Now if I do employee dot department, what is it going to give me? It's going to give me undefined. Correct now? Because employee doesn't have any department mentioned over here. This is good. Now if I do employee dot department dot name, I know that there is no employee department here, but still I am going to do employee dot department dot name, because when you're getting an object as a response from an API call, sometimes you may not know like what is available as data, what is not available, right? You may not know, but you're querying like this employee dot department dot name. What is this line is going to give you? This is going to actually fail with an error. You're saying cannot read the properties of undefined reading name. Why? Because employee or department is already undefined. You cannot read a property called name on top of undefined because this much is undefined. This is where your optional chaining coming into picture. With optional chaining operator, now you will be able to handle many such cases without doing any kind of condition. For example, here the what condition you would have done here, you would have checked const name equals to employee dot department. If that is the case, then only you do employee dot department dot name. Instead of doing this, you can simply do const name equals to employee dot department, then optional chaining is question mark then dot. The pair of these two characters gives you the optional chaining operator, and then you give the property for which you are unsure about. Now if I do console.log of name, I am not going to get this error that I was getting over here. Rather, I'm going to get something called undefined. I am getting undefined at the line number 16, which is still good to get because you are not really terminating your program with a runtime error, right? So in these cases, optional chaining is very useful. Please use them. Now, with that, I want to also call out one more thing. Sometime it might happen that you want to get the error to be reported. If you're anticipating somewhere really a value, but API is not giving the value, you want that to be reported. If you want that error to be reported, then you can omit this question mark and you can go in the regular way. In this case, it is going to throw the error again. But if you want to determine using the undefined itself that whether that particular value is defined from the backend or not, you can go for the optional chaining freely. So this is another way of accessing the value of an object by making sure that you are gracefully handling the absence of a value, whether it is undefined or could be a value which is null. So why optional chaining will be useful to you. Oh, wow, so long session, isn't it? Yeah, but I enjoy teaching this. And if you are here till now from the beginning learning, please post a comment. I want to recognize you. Like, who are those folks having this much zeal and stamina to learn and to learn JavaScript in much better way? I hope you liked today's session. If that is the case, please post a like, give a comment. Don't forget to do the task. Tasks are again there in the task.md file. You can always access it from my GitHub. Open it up. If you like the work, please give the start to the 40 days of JavaScript repository. It will be really great. Join our tapaScript Discord where you can discuss a lot of things, discuss about your task. Myself or anybody from community will be definitely helping you out. All right, so the next video is about this keyword. Now we know everything to get into this keyword and just kill it. So wait for day 13 where we are going to discuss this keyword. Until then, take care of yourself, finish the task. See you soon.